Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 3 of Tissue Talks. I am your host, Max Weisenthal, alongside my co-host,
Diego, as always. I feel like I always, when you intro, you'll be like just going off, and then I'm just like, I'm Diego. Hi.
There it is. Just slides in. I'm Diego, and then I kind of go back. Today, we're going to be talking about how to eat for the holidays. As Thanksgiving's around the corner, we wanted to kind of talk about dietary approaches and just generally how to handle the mental when moving into November, December. Holiday season's right around the corner. We want to make sure we can provide you guys some useful tips and tricks to be able to eat according to your goals, while also not making it super stressful and super heavy. We're going to talk about our experience a little bit today with holidays. I think we're going to have some funny anecdotes and talk about just generally our experience and how we've been able to coach others to kind of succeed and maybe change what the goals are during a holiday so that success can look different depending on where you're coming from and what your history is with food and all that stuff. So we're going to kind of get all into it today. We have an interesting little flow we're going to go through. But yeah, before we get started, how's everything been with you? How's everything going?
Everything's going great. I skipped class this morning, so that's a great start to the day. I was just like, I need to get sleep today, you know? Like you can feel it when like the sleep depth just starts to build up. And I was like, I think in terms of like what's best for me right now, I need sleep and I feel good. So I'm glad I did that.
I feel like you don't even realize how much the sleep debt builds up until you get that night of good sleep, and then you're like flushed fatigue, and you're actually
like,
awake.
Oh my God, I'm human again. This is crazy.
Yes. Yeah. I think I got like 10 hours last night. This was my morning that I had no AM sessions. So went to bed at like 11, woke up at like 8 o'clock, and then went back to sleep till 10. So I was just like,
oh, dude, that's the best. That's the best. God. When you can just like hit the snooze and just like go right back to bed. So good.
It's great.
You ever get like recurrent dreams where you're like you'll go to sleep, right? Wake up and you'll be like having a dream, but you wake up like mid-dream and then you fall asleep and the dream continues.
Yeah, and you kind of want it to continue sometimes. You're like, I need to go back. I didn't finish the quest.
I need to go back. I gotta finish. I need to know the lore, bro. I need to know the lore.
Yeah, you gotta dive through and really get back into it. And then sometimes it's a bad dream and you're like, I don't want to go back. And you're like, I don't want to go back to sleep. It's directly related to holiday eating. It's all tied in together. The nightmare, Thanksgiving dinner, your fat loss goals are out the window. Might as well just binge.
The night before Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to start off today's podcast. We're going to kind of come from the lens of this from a lot of our viewers are most likely you, the listener, probably have goals of changing your body composition at times, or maybe you've gone into the holidays while you're in a fat loss phase and you're a little bit nervous about losing progress. Maybe you're just at maintenance. We're going to kind of talk about what each of those things look like just before we get deeper into strategies and practical applications. We're going to briefly explain energy balance. Let's talk about what it is to be an energy surplus, what it is to be in a calorie deficit, and then maintenance. So Diego, if you want to get started, we're just going to kind of have a brief section for those who maybe don't fully understand the terms, or we can just kind of set a groundwork so that we can then work from it from here. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So to kind of cue you guys in a little bit into what people are talking about when they throw around kind of these like broad fitness terms like, oh, I'm bulking, oh, I'm cutting, like these are basically nutritional interventions that are geared towards changing your aesthetics to some degree, right? So it's like geared towards mostly just like kind of changing what your body composition is, not necessarily like a health or a performance thing more than it is just like gaining weight or losing weight. So what that comes down to is your calorie balance. So you have an allotted amount of calories that you need per day to maintain your current body weight. And that's what we're going to be referring to as calorie maintenance, right? So that's the state in which the calories that you're intaking equal the calories that you're expending through kind of what we talked about last episode. Shameless plug, go watch it. When you like have your basal metabolic rate and you have your energy expenditure through exercise and through non-exercise, all of those things sum up into what is like the amount of calories that you need to maintain your body weight. So when you're trying to lose specifically fat, because I don't think a single person wants to go on a cut to lose muscle, right? You're trying to lose fat. That's kind of like the major, I guess, aesthetic intervention that people want to do, specifically for like the summer or something, or like to look shredded. When you want to do that, you want to enter what's called a calorie deficit, which is when you're eating less than you need so that your body starts taking energy from your energy reserves. So those energy reserves come about by being in an energy surplus, which is when you eat more than you need. And your body's extremely efficient at storing those calories because we've survived through thousands and thousands of years of starvation. So your body's just going to take those calories, store them as fat for later. And then when you enter a calorie deficit, your body's going to take from those reserves and it's going to use them to kind of keep you in that maintenance stage.
Yeah, that's really well said. The reason we want to kind of briefly highlight that before going further is each of these different stages, whether you're in a deficit, we could call that a fat loss phase, maintenance, just kind of trying to hold on to and maintain your current body composition. And then a surplus, typically, if it's intentional and you are resistance training, it is with the goal of adding lean mass. During that phase, it's expected to add some fat mass as well, but if you're diligent, where you can look to optimize those ratios so that you can add a appreciable amount of lean mass while you're gaining weight, especially if you're on top of it and the surplus isn't too big. To briefly add to that, it's cool to talk about it quantitatively, but for people who aren't necessarily like tracking calories, kind of the feeling of each, right? It depends on your genetics largely, but if you're eating at maintenance, you can expect to feel hungry throughout the day here and there, but not overly so. You're eating probably just planned meals, so you feel like you're at satiety. You feel content walking away from meals, but not super full. And your maintenance is a range as well. So to add to that briefly, it's not a set number. It can fluctuate day to day depending on your activity. But also, like let's say you're maintaining around like 170 pounds. Well, that might be like 168 to 172 on the scale. It's going to be more of a general range. For a surplus, you could expect to most likely walk away from meals feeling slightly beyond fullness. You still will be hungry throughout the day at times. You shouldn't expect zero hunger at all. But, a surplus shouldn't be really, really big, ideally, if you're looking to minimize fat gain while maximizing muscle gain. And some people can really have a hard time with the surplus for mental reasons. We could get into that a little bit later. And then the deficit, aka the fat loss phase, you're walking away from your meals slightly before feeling full or kind of leaving a little bit of room in your belly. You might be feeling a little bit more hunger, but you don't want to be overly hungry or starving to the point where it's really taking away from the benefits of the fat loss phase, as well as, it's creeping into your life where the food focus is so high that you could potentially start this type of binge eating cycle that we're going to talk about a little bit in this episode. So, a healthy deficit should feel like, yeah, you're hungry, and that is in a sense, a reward because you're on the right path. But that experience of hunger shouldn't be so extreme to the point where you are basically feeling super deprived and your energy levels begin to tank. So that's just quickly a run through of what each of these phases should roughly feel like. And then we're kind of going to talk about how this applies to the holiday meals, because I know a lot of us generally, at least in the US, a lot of people have goals of fat loss. Largely speaking, most people that are listening to this probably don't want to gain a bunch of weight throughout the holidays, or if they do, maybe they want to minimize that. So we want to kind of describe things today, like strategies you can use to minimize that fat gain, but also just like understanding the phase of life the holidays present to us. It might be more beneficial to not be in a very strict fat loss phase through the holidays, and why that might be. So I guess we can kind of talk a little bit about that and why dieting through the holidays can be a little bit stressful, obviously.
Mm-hmm. So I think to start that off, we should kind of talk a little bit about why the holidays are a stressful time for people that are trying to have these like big body composition changes. So, as you've probably experienced, if you live in America, the holidays are filled with many yummy treats and many good foods, and they are kind of like the basis of it is like obviously you're getting together, it's a big family reunion, and one of the pivotal points of these family reunions is bonding over food. So everyone kind of like brings their own kind of like dish or their own dessert into the mix, and everyone just has a good time and enjoys it. That's all good and well. The problem of it is that a lot of these foods are going to be highly processed and they're going to be highly calorically dense, meaning that for a pretty minute amount of like actual food volume, you're getting a lot of calories from them just because they're going to be higher in fat, higher in sugar. And these things usually like amount to just higher caloric density in general. and not that filling of a response after eating them. So it means that you can eat a lot of it, which then, if you're trying to lose weight, it can put you in a pretty significant calorie surplus, which is kind of like the antithesis to what you're trying to do. So obviously this is very reductionist, right? We're kind of just surmising this very simply right now, and we'll go a little bit more later into why it's necessarily not as black and white as this. But this is like the premise that most people kind of like base this like holiday stress on. It's the fact that like, oh, I'm trying to actively lose weight by eating less, but these holiday meals are pretty much oriented around just like eating a ton and like, you know, enjoying that food with your relatives and kind of just not thinking about being in a deficit. So they're contrasting ideas, and it can cause a little bit of cognitive dissonance leading into the holidays.
Totally. I think that's really well said. And also, the holidays break up structure. And often I find my clients, as well as myself, really thrive with structure and repeatability day to day. You know, you have your meal structure, you have a rough meal plan, some deviations are to be expected. But when you get the ball rolling with either surplus, cut, whatever it is, it feels really good and rewarding because you know that your process is aligned with your outcome. Whereas when the holidays come around, you're really just throwing a wrench in the kind of the tools, and you're not really sure how that's going to impact your outcomes. So you can derive a lot of anxiety from that, which is totally understandable. So, kind of a preface, people in the US, the average American gains roughly 1 to 2 pounds per year over their lifespan. And a lot of that weight gain typically comes throughout the holidays, right? And we see the other side of that. January 1st rolls around. There's a really big drive to like lose all that added fat, lose all that added weight. And generally, that cycle, we can kind of zoom out a little bit and see that coming and set up some strategies to hopefully mitigate the negative effects of that overeating period. Or generally going into the holidays, set reasonable expectations. And as Diego alluded to, what are the holidays really for, right? It's not for specifically overfeeding per se. That's not the actual goal of meeting for Thanksgiving. The meeting for Thanksgiving is to, you know, express gratitude, be amongst your loved ones, check in. And today I want to highlight how we can really maximize that and allow that to come to the surface instead of, oh my God, Thanksgiving's in 3 days. I have to start pulling food. I have to prepare for this big hoarding of food and really just hoarding calories for a day. And that can lead to a really big binge restrict cycle. And before we go a little bit further, I think it's important to kind of identify and define what that is, because people probably have had that experience, but don't understand how relatable it is between people, especially in fitness. So a binge restrict cycle, basically binging is just an uncontrollable episode of eating in which you kind of lose the ability to stop, or you're no longer eating based on trying to, you know, fuel yourself per se, but it comes from a place of scarcity in which you are presented with food and you feel like you can no longer stop eating. Something takes over. It's almost like your brain has no longer cares about what you think. That food's going down. It's going to keep going down until you feel extreme levels of fullness, nausea, sickness. And sometimes that can be followed up if you have specific quote unquote eating disorders by purging per se in some contexts, not always, but it can follow up with, you know, removing of food from the body, whether you're throwing up or whatever. That can happen, and actually happens a lot more commonly, and it's not really spoken about as much. And I think bringing awareness to that can really help you, the viewer, understand that if you've had even thoughts of this, or you've done this in the past and hidden it from your family members, I have experience with that, you're not alone in this, right? So understanding, especially those with body composition related goals, this is to be expected. How to better frame your holiday eating so you can avoid that really nasty cycle of restrict, 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 low calorie day, low calorie day, low calorie day. Here's Thanksgiving. Here's 6,000 calories. I'm going crazy. And just, you don't feel good after that, right? It ends up never feeling worth it. So why don't we briefly touch on that cycle a little bit and just kind of talk about maybe your own experience with that, and we can kind of maybe present strategies to help the viewer not deal with those type of negative ramifications.
For sure. So, like Max alluded to, eating disorders and I guess like symptoms of eating disorders are very common in the fitness field. Obviously, because like apart from the fact that we're very much built to avoid starvation, right? Like when you are starving, your body's going to push you to eat a ton of food. we're also being kind of like judged in the kind of fitness realm specifically for how we look. That's kind of like the measurement of like how you stack within that like social hierarchy, whether we like it or not. It's kind of just how it works. Like if you're shredded on IG, you're going to get more likes, you know. And if it's your business, or if your like profession revolves around the way you look or the way you perform, it can be a big stress to kind of just like let loose on the holidays and do something that doesn't necessarily go towards your goals. So you kind of have this, you have this pincer attack, right? Where like your biology is pushing you to eat, right? Because we're just, we see tasty food, the tasty food tastes good, that tells our brain we need more of it, and then it's just like, you know, something clicks, like Max said, you kind of just like lose control. And then you also have the guilt from kind of your like self perception of how you stack within that like social hierarchy of like either social media or like your lifting buddies or like your, I guess, identity as a lifter. You know, like people see you like, oh, you're the gym guy, you know, you're the guy who eats chicken and rice and broccoli or whatever. um so you have like kind of like just like the perfect, the like the perfect catastrophe pretty much, where like you're being fueled to eat from one side, right? You're getting like just like that drive to eat really tasty food, and you're also feeling this guilt of like, oh my god, I shouldn't be doing this, but like I can't stop, and it just spirals, right? That's like where you start to just like fall down the rabbit hole, you just start to like go too deep. And then part of, I guess, in my experience, something that did pop up, because I mean, I like we kind of alluded to, like we had experience with this, you know, especially when you were a lot younger, when we didn't really know as much as we did currently. Like it was easy to think, oh, if I overeat one day, like I'm gaining 50 pounds of fat, like I'm going right back to square one. But then you kind of have that thought of like, well, tomorrow I'm going to go back on the diet, so I can just keep going right now, right? Like I should
Mm.
just keep going because I'm not going to get this anymore. Like once this is done, it's done. And that I think is really where kind of the devil lies, so to speak. Like within that thought of like, if I don't get as much pleasure, as much hedonism as I can from this right now, I'm not going to get it for the next 3 months, or I'm not going to get it for however long. And that just pushes you to continue to eat even more. So if we're going to try to tackle eating through the holidays and kind of demystifying this idea of like eating through the holidays is like a total wrench in your plans and like an entire deviation from like your goals, we have to like tackle that guilt that comes up, and that idea that like if you should only allow yourself to eat in this one specific circumstance, and after that it's like cold turkey, like zero, like no more pleasure whatsoever. You just go back to winter arc or whatever the kids call it these days.
Mm-hmm. That's so well said. And that really ties into the idea of those who struggle most with how to eat, how to deal with those super high pleasure signalings are probably the people who are restricting way too much on their base diet. So
Mm-hmm.
creating morality around food, saying this is a good food or this is a bad food, really sets you up for having less tools and understanding your emotional management when you're faced with eating foods that are off plan. So this is why there's general heuristics in fitness of you should have 80% whole foods, 20% fun foods, right? And some people see that as well. You know, I'm really serious about my goals. So I'm going to go 95% just clean foods, quote unquote, really minimally processed foods, whole foods. And I'm not going to eat that ice cream because I'm hard and like I'm better and I'm going to actually get my goals. I'm going to be more shredded than you and et cetera, et cetera. When even if you see that on fitness, you see you're scrolling through IG, you see that guy who's like always shredded year round. You're probably not seeing the suffering he's incurring, he or she, you know, the social events they're removing themselves from, the inability to go have meals out with their family, when in reality, that's not actually fitness adding to your life. The cut is no
Mm-mm.
longer serving you. And I think it's really important if you're an individual who gets really anxious around holiday meals, you have to look at the process and the philosophy you're subscribing to on a day-to-day basis around your food and your lifestyle and how you perceive your diet, because it largely is a red flag showing that you probably need more flexibility in your diet and have the tools to go out and have a meal with your friends, family, loved one, and not feel like you're completely off track, right? Or that you are a bad person because you've eaten bad foods, when in reality that doesn't exist. And we can talk a little bit about how energy is stored in the body at some point as well, and talk about even if you go off plan one day, let's say your Thanksgiving meal is 4,500 calories in total, right? And maybe your maintenance is 2,800. Let's just say 3,000 for simple numbers terms. That 1,500 calorie surplus is not all going to be stored as fat. And just having the information, that's why I want to present this to the viewer today, you, the listener. It really is liberating knowing that every single food that you eat off plan isn't immediately going to your love handles. It's not immediately going to your belly, right? It's just
Even
not
though it
how
may
it
feel like
works.
it.
Even though
Even
it
though it
feels
may
like
feel
it.
like it.
Yeah,
Like, I get it.
totally. 100%. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the specifics as to why perhaps the calories you eat in a surplus aren't added to specifically body fat always, and maybe bring up a little bit of those where else the food is getting stored, how we can handle that. Let's say we're eating a meal, or how we can deal with off-plan meals and how it affects our metrics and all that type of stuff, if you kind of want to go into that a little bit.
For sure, for sure. I think this is a really thick topic to dissect because obviously energy balance is, as Max alluded to earlier, it's a very day by day thing. Like, your energy balance isn't just like a static metric or target. It kind of fluctuates throughout the day, or like day to day, based on like your activity levels, based on what you're eating. Because like if you eat, for example, a higher protein diet, you can have higher energy expenditure than if you eat a lower protein diet, marginally so, but like what you eat can like influence your energy balance. So when we try to think of calorie maintenance, or your maintenance calories is just like a static metric, I think that's when we can get into the trap of thinking in black and white and thinking, oh, if we go over this, it's over. We're storing, right? Like, this is immediately I'm in a surplus. Immediately I gained 15 kilos of fat. Like, that's kind of like where I think that basic assumption comes from, just by like thinking of calorie maintenance in a reductionist view. However, based on research and also on just personal anecdote of like people who've been lifting for enough, you'll realize that when you enter a so-called energy surplus, it won't translate to fat gain directly, right? So if you eat 35,000 calories above your maintenance, which is theoretically the amount it takes to gain a pound of fat, right? A pound of fat is going to equal roughly 3,600 calories. If you eat 3,600 calories above your maintenance, you're not going to gain a pound of fat. It's not going to happen like that, because your body's going to upregulate its thermogenesis, because metabolic processes aren't entirely efficient. So like a lot of time, or not a lot of the time, actually all the time, this is just like basic biochemistry. When you break down food, a lot of that food is actually going to be released as body heat. So you're going to start to see, for example, like when people say like, oh, I got the meat sweats, that just means like you ate a bunch of food and now you're like sweating like crazy, because you're obviously like upregulating your body's like core temperature. And that's going to happen to a higher degree if you eat a lot. And on top of that, you're also going to get what's called the thermic effect of feeding, which is specific to the macronutrients that you eat. So, for example, protein, like I kind of alluded to, has a higher thermic effect of feeding than carbohydrates and fats. So the energy surplus isn't as like black or white as you kind of would think. It's not like it's predictable to like the caloric level, like you can say like, I can specifically tell you how many pounds of fat I gained by like how many calories I went over my maintenance, because you can't even calculate your maintenance. Your maintenance technically is a moving target, right? You can estimate it, but you can't like reach it specifically, and it's going to change on how much you eat. So that's like the first part of the equation, right? Just by eating food, you're kind of influencing your maintenance, or like eating a certain amount of food, you're influencing your maintenance to the extent that it's not your maintenance anymore. It changed just within that day based on how much you ate. Max, you want to talk a little bit about kind of the expenditure side of things?
Yeah, 100%. That's well said. This is also largely genetic. So for some individuals who enter a surplus, like we all know that person that in high school who just couldn't never gain weight no matter what they ate. There's different types of phenotypes, or just individuals will have different responses to overfeeding. So some individuals, when they overfeed, as Diego alluded to, their metabolism upregulates, or basically they just move their body more in a kind of compensation for that incoming energy. So someone, if you're the person on the table who's bouncing your knee up and down all the time, or you just dance a lot, or when you feel like you overeat, you move all the time, right? You're the type of person who generally, I think it's called a spendthrift metabolism. I'm not sure exactly which one of those terms is for which, but basically it doesn't matter the taxonomy of it. Essentially, there are individuals who, when they have a lot of food, burn a lot of those excess calories. And as Diego also alluded to, especially if you're someone who's resistance training, that excess calories can largely be stored in your muscle as glycogen. So just because your scale weight is going to skyrocket after a day of really big overeating, it's important to highlight not all that weight is actually going to be fat. So as kind of repeating what Diego said, the muscle, depending how much muscle you have, it's a reservoir for carbohydrates. So you could be replenishing and filling up those stores for a lot of actual calories. In the muscle, it depends how much you have as an individual, but you could be storing anywhere from like 400, 500, 600, upwards of more than that grams of carbohydrate actually in your muscle. Roughly 70 grams of carbohydrate can be stored in your liver. And then we have roughly like 5 to 10 grams of circulating blood glucose in our bloodstream. So that's like already around, let's say, a roughly, maybe like 700 grams of carbs ish, depending on how much muscle mass you have. That can just be stored in the muscle. And that's why you look really full and you get crazy pumps after Thanksgiving. So that's
And
a
on
really
top of
important.
that,
Yeah,
on
go ahead.
top of that, per each gram of glycogen that you store, you're storing an additional 3 to 4 grams of water. So you're not only getting kind of like that puffy or full look from eating a ton of carbs, you're also getting a bunch of water stored that's basically amplifying how you look. And it can make you think like, oh my God, I gained all this weight. This is all fat. When in reality, a lot of it is water weight, and you're going to see it
100%.
come off in the subsequent days after that.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting addition. Is typically where we store body fat is also where we store subcutaneous water, or where we store the water that accompanies the carbohydrates. So it can be really confusing, and especially if you're unaware of this, you have a big day of overeating. The next day, you literally look fatter per se because you're storing that water, as Diego just said. So if you even just run the math really quickly, let's say you store 400 grams of carbs in the muscle, that's going to be an extra, let's say 3 grams of that is the water as well. So that quick math, another 1,200 grams of water plus the 400 of carb, we're looking at 1,600 grams. That's almost like 1.5 kilograms of additional, fullness in your body, which comes out to like what, maybe 2.5 pounds or something like that, maybe 3 pounds. So
Yeah.
that's just right away. That's 3 pounds right there of just carbs and water, and that's not fat mass. And as Diego alluded to, that will come off in time, especially as you use it for exercise and just daily existence. So that's an important thing to highlight. As I mentioned briefly, the thermogenesis effect. So for some people, as Diego said, like that really overheating thing, especially if you're eating a lot of meat. We know protein has a super high thermic effect of food. So you get hotter. Your body's like a literal metabolic furnace when it's eating a lot of protein. You could feel super hot. I don't know if you've ever been like laying in bed and you're like after a huge dinner and you can't use the blankets because your body's like literally a furnace. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then beyond that, just briefly, like the protein we also use for building muscle and other things like that. So especially if you're training, all of this excess food isn't going to turn into fat. So I think that's actually a really important thing to highlight. And I really liked how we just broke that down a little bit. And we can add some resources in the description for people who are interested in learning more about overfeeding. We could do a whole episode on that because it's a really interesting topic. Different individuals will have different responses to acute overfeeding in terms of how much they move more, how, person to person will vary, but it's important to remember, even if you go over on one day, it's not going to ruin your progress. What will ruin your progress if your goals are, maintenance or a deficit, is if you treat that day like a failure and you punish yourself by creating this cycle of overeating and undereating, really big undulations from maintenance. You can create this binge restrict cycle down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that for all those reasons that we talked about, and also something that I wanted to add in there, food volume. So like the actual volume of food that is stored in your stomach is going to influence your body weight. Go figure. If you eat half a pound of food, you're going to weigh half a pound more because that food is not just going to evaporate. It's going to stay in your stomach as you're digesting it and passing through your GI tract. So, barring all those things that we said, right? Thermic effect of feeding, you're going to store more glycogen, you're going to store more water, you're going to move all of those things, make it so that your body weight is no longer going to become useful to you, right? Like the measurement of your body weight is going to become so murky and so distorted that it's just going to mess with your psyche. So, one of the first tips that we're going to drop on this podcast in terms of what to do surrounding your holiday meals is don't listen to your body weight. Just don't even weigh yourself. Just don't do it, right? You're going to look in the mirror, it's going to look a little different. You're going to look puffier after if you eat a lot, and you're going to weigh yourself and you're going to be heavier. But guess what? That's just how it's supposed to be. It's not necessarily that you did anything wrong or that you like completely got sidetracked. It's just your body's response to an acute overfeeding episode, right? So anticipate it, right? And don't be surprised when it happens, and don't place more burden on yourself psychologically by trying to weigh yourself and trying to interpret that like potential weight gain, because that's
Yeah.
really where you can kind of derail yourself, where you're just like, you see the scale jumped up 3 pounds after maybe like losing 2 pounds in the past like 3 weeks or something, right? And you're like, oh my God, I just gained all of that back. And then you just start, spiraling in your head. Just don't weigh
Hmm.
yourself. It's fine. It's literally going to go away after a couple of days. I promise.
Hmm. Yeah. Also, other things you should avoid doing around overfeeding. This is unconventional advice that you might hear that you wouldn't hear like your online coach tell you per se is try not to do a lot of body checking. So you'll notice
Mm,
maybe as you walk past mirrors, you're going to lift your shirt and like feel disappointed. Try to not worry so much about your physical appearance during that time, understanding it isn't an acute way of existing. It's an acute body condition per se. The appearance is going to change rapidly as you get back to normal track. So try not to body check. Try to wear clothing that's a little bit more comfortable, maybe a little bit less restrictive, things that aren't going to be pulling on you, not, really tight belts or jeans, perhaps. And during the time, especially like beyond Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving's done, then you have 4 weeks later is Christmas. And some people, as Diego alluded to, in their culture, really go hard on foods even throughout the month of Christmas. We've all seen those holiday calendars with chocolates behind each day, right? Like that
oh, dude.
metastasizes. Grandma has cookies out every day, or maybe whatever that looks
Yeah.
like. If you want to share maybe your experience with
Dude,
that.
no. I mean, obviously Americans go crazy, but we Puerto Ricans, oh my God. Like, dude, we literally we literally have holidays until like mid-January. Like the
Yeah.
holidays go from like Thanksgiving to like mid-January, and all in between it's like coquito shots, like fucking like all types of cakes, fucking like pies, everything, like
Yep.
roasted pork. Like it's literally just like a free for all, and it's so easy to just see all of that and be like, well, so what's why stay on track, when I'm just going to be
Totally.
derailed all of these times, like I
Mm-hmm.
understand it, I get it, like you can definitely jump to that conclusion, but
Mm-hmm.
but you can't just catastrophize these like acute overfeeding episodes. And also you can't kind of go into these expecting to overeat by a crazy amount and then having that actually come to fruition. If you're
100%.
expecting each one of these to be a binge episode, guess what? They're going to be a binge episode. If you're anticipating it, like Max was saying, by restricting like crazy going into it and restricting like crazy afterwards, you're just going to exponentiate that problem, and you're just going to have that like kind of like binge restrict cycle that he was referring to. So like we get it, it's like it's definitely, like you said, a period of like not being on your regular routine. But if you're going to anticipate like making that derail you entirely, and you're already kind of in your head like this is what's going to happen, like it's kind of law of attraction, it is what's going to happen.
100%. And there's actually research to support that those who are about to begin a diet will have incredible amounts of calorie overfeeding in the days before commencing a diet. And it's the same thing. So I think it's important that we highlighted if shit hits the fan, what to do about it. But let's move on a little bit to how can we actually prevent or try to mitigate some of the extreme overfeeding. And there's definitely a
Mm-hmm.
range here, right? There's like you went 600 to 1,000 calories over maintenance. Not a huge deal compared to I just ate 5,000 calories over maintenance. So let's try to highlight a little bit about how we can stay on the lower end of that range and just some practical strategies. If you want to do you want to start off on that one?
For sure. Yeah. So we were kind of having a little talk before this about things that we've read about, but also things that we've done in the past. Obviously, as we kind of mentioned, we've made mistakes. Like I've been there. Like I remember when I think I was like 15 or 16. I was doing one of my first like proper diets. I had a bodybuilding coach at the time. He was not good. Like bodybuilding coach. He was just like
sure.
old school like chicken rice broccoli guy, whatever. He had me like diet really hard during the holidays, and I remember he like finally gave me a cheat meal on Thanksgiving,
Oh
and he
my
was like just
God.
he literally like intentionally told me to go ham. He was like, eat as much as you can. I was like, holy shit, okay, like I guess this is what's gonna happen. So I was like, I know, so stupid in
That's so
retrospect.
irresponsible.
It
That's
is, and
crazy.
that's why we have to put out information like this, because this, you literally see this in the fitness industry. You see people talking about like, just like don't eat anything that isn't on your diet, and then just go crazy when these like holidays rolls around. That just whatever. I remember like dieting up until Thanksgiving, and then that year my uncle like brought these like, they're like these pastries called quesitos. They're so good, by the way. I'm like excited. I'm excited to get back to Puerto Rico and try them. But he brought these like pastries from his bakery, and I literally like it was like it was like a dog on a leash, and the dog was like just like actually like foaming at the mouth. I literally like ate all of them and had the worst stomach ache I've ever had in my life, to the point where I actually had to like I couldn't interact with anyone. I had to like go up to my room and like nap pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what like can go wrong, where you're just like missing the point entirely of what the celebration should be. It's like spend time with people and like enjoy this food and this kind of like environment with people, not just for the sake of like the food, if that makes sense. So what you can take away from this story, right, is don't over diet before going into Thanksgiving. However, this doesn't mean that you can't prepare for it, right? To kind of like create what we would consider to call, or we would consider to be kind of like a calorie buffer, right? Which basically just means like you're creating room to be able to enjoy food, but not to the extent that you're kind of perpetuating the problem, or that you're making it worse. So instead of over restricting like crazy following days before, doing a bunch of cardio, just trying to find any single way you can to like shed a bunch of pounds so you can pack them on again in Thanksgiving, before kind of a holiday celebration rolls around, eat your regular diet, right? Don't necessarily go off the rails and like try to do a bunch of extra shit that you haven't been doing. Just eat what you've been eating. If you want to eat a little bit less, that's okay. I wouldn't recommend doing a bunch less though, maybe like if you want to do some extra like steps on the days before, or maybe like an extra 20 minutes on the treadmill or something, like go ham. That's fine. If it quells your anxiety a little bit for those holiday eats, then that's great, but it's not necessary. But on the day of, I want you to try to eat at least protein, right? So like try to get your protein in before the meals, so you can, not necessarily be starving, and you're starting to get in some of your like daily nutrient requirements, and you're kind of just, you're not like overly restricting, right? So have your protein, have fruits, have vegetables, which are very filling, right? So you don't feel overly restricted. And then just save some of those carbs and fats that you have allotted for the rest of the day for the meal. And that way, you don't feel like you're, again, overly restricting yourself. You're having some calories in. You're doing something that, and this is a big part of it, you're doing something that's still conducive to your goals. So you still feel like you're in control of the situation. And you're also creating a calorie buffer, so you can enjoy some food and have that peace of mind that you did do something proactive about it, without just derailing yourself entirely and like just restricting yourself to the point where you literally feel like you have to eat everything in front of your face.
Well said. And to add to that, this advice about restricting perhaps, or just preparing, I guess is a better word, in the days leading up to it is going to be super individual dependent, depending on your history with eating. If you're somebody who can get away with, you know, not necessarily having a super big restrict after a binge, or you're just someone who doesn't have maybe some signs of disordered eating, and this isn't meant in any negative connotation because many people in your life probably don't tell you about it, but have some struggles with their relationships with food, I would say that just be mindful to not create obsessive habits. And if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I think if I start restricting days leading up, that's going to make me binge more, you know that better than we do. So make sure to stay more on plan, or, kind of less preparation in a sense can set you up for less of a anticipatory overeating in a way. Uh, yeah, I think the protein and veggies comment is really helpful. Maybe just having a big salad, even in those days leading up or day of, drinking plenty of water, and trying to focus on the other important elements of Thanksgiving, which can kind of lead us into point number 2 here, which is when you're not eating or you're not actually at mealtime, try to stay out of the kitchen, stay out of the dining room, and distance your body away from the foods. And this is something that I think is underlooked often in prescriptions for how to avoid overeating, is just your environment will play a super huge role into what your brain is considering, the dopamine pathways it's chasing, the ways of trying to have that reward experience. So when it's not mealtime or after you finished your meal, perhaps get up, maybe go for a little walk around so you feel better, maybe go to the living room so you can have conversations with your family members, loved ones, etc., and just try to get that food focus out of your brain a little bit, right? Instead of sitting around all day staring at the cookies, listening to this, people talking about the food, to smelling the food, all that's well and fine, but that can lead to just this, as Diego said, literally the dog on the leash. Like, you're just ready to get after it. Whereas maybe you go for a walk with your cousin you haven't talked to in months, or you go, take a walk with your grandparents if you're lucky enough to still have them around, like that type of stuff, right? So try to focus on the other things and physically remove yourself from the setting in which there's a high abundance of super highly palatable foods that have, a lot of calories, fat, and sugar within them. I think that would be a really helpful thing for a lot of people to hear, because you don't have to sit at the dining room table for longer than, the ceremony or tradition of Thanksgiving that your family does. It lasts for.
Yeah, and you don't want to just use your willpower to not eat the entire night, right? Like, you don't want to have to you don't want to have to just like stare at the food and just like hold yourself back from continuing to eat the entire night, because that's exhausting. That's stressing. Like,
Yeah.
that's not why you're there. You don't just want to like be stressing the entire night and anxious the entire night because you're just like slapping your hand, like trying not to reach for the cookies. Like, just put yourself in a place in which you can just enjoy the night and not have to focus on that as much. And a lot of that is physically distancing yourself from the
Yeah.
food, apart from obviously emotionally distancing yourself a little bit as well. That's like the harder part, and that takes time to build up. But just like, not, like we were saying, not creating this like this anxiety and this guilt surrounding eating good food, because it just perpetuates the problem. Another thing that I was going to mention from what Max said was, when you're at these holiday parties, you're usually under the influence of some sort of substance, right? Like, if you're a person of age, you are having alcohol, right? You're drinking with your family, and that can lower your inhibitions a little bit, right? So that can also kind of lower the barrier for entry, so to speak, to having a binging episode if you are like prone to those. So just being aware of the fact that, like, if you're going to be drinking, or if you plan on drinking that night, like, you can kind of lose control a little bit of your kind of apprehensions or your like inhibitions towards eating those foods. It can just make you more aware of those tendencies to like, so that you can minimize the chances that they happen. So physically distancing yourself, great idea. I think one thing that I would add to that is also kind of creating a social connotation to the eating, right? So like, if everyone's out there like talking, having fun, reminiscing on old times, if it was one of my like holiday parties, we'd be like watching reggaeton music videos because my dad loves to play those during fam. I don't know why he'll just like be
He
playing like
does.
Daddy Yankee just like on the screen. It'll be like just like people driving around on cars and like shooting guns and shit. Like, and my grandparents are like, "Oh, that's great, that's awesome."
It's fire.
But like everyone's out there having fun, and then you're sitting in the kitchen like eating by yourself. Like that's not, again, that's not the point of Thanksgiving. So just try to focus on when you are eating food, enjoy it with those around you, right? Like eat it socially so that you can obviously enjoy the food. You can like kind of derive that pleasure from the eating, but that's not the only vector of enjoyment that you're deriving it from, right? You're deriving it from like that social community aspect of it where you're enjoying it with people rather than just like eating by yourself, because you can do that any day. You can buy a box of Oreos and sit in your kitchen right now and eat them. But like these holiday celebrations are not about that. They're not about just like eating the food. They're about spending time with your loved ones. So just kind of adding that connotation in there so that you can have a little bit of a mindset shift surrounding it.
That's really well said. And also reminding yourself that there's always tomorrow and the food's going to be there tomorrow. And it's not like all of a sudden it's going to be gone after Thanksgiving is really helpful. Kind of talking about that anticipatory reflex we have as like, oh, this is the day I get to eat the gross, the shitty food that I shouldn't be eating. Well, at any time, if you're struggling to have foods like, Oreos or cookies, maybe it's a good practice for this individual to go out, buy a box and only have two and then put the rest away, right? There's some advice of like, don't keep bad food in your home. Well, it's like, well, maybe for some that can be helpful, but this doesn't help that individual once it gets to Thanksgiving Day and they haven't had any interaction with this food that hasn't been surrounded by binging. So literally training yourself to have this quote unquote hedonic deviation, which just means a slight straying away from the plan that feels mostly based in pleasure. There's nothing actually wrong with that in essence, as long as it is controllable and doesn't you go beyond a threshold that's acceptable. So I think Diego's point is really interesting. And also just to add briefly, like you only have so many bullets in your gun of willpower before you just run out. So trying to minimize the environment to have so much pulling back all day, as we kind of said, detach your body from the room. I know you want to comment on the hedonic deviation.
On the hedonic deviation. I'm laughing because when me and Max like first started hanging out, like obviously we were still like maturing, we were still learning about these things, and we were both kind of, I wouldn't say like recovering from like eating disorders, but we were like, kind of leaving that little orthorexic, like no junk food phase. And we were kind of helping each other with that. And we would just like throw around, like text each other, like, I just had a hedonic deviation.
I mean, seriously, it's like so real. I think people feel alone in this often. And if you're listening to this and you're like, God, fuck, I just can't deal with this or whatever, just understand you're not alone. And hopefully in time the education around how food is stored and how your body deals with it and even the psychology and like it's biology, it really is, it's not just your fault. It's like a lot of it is a result of restriction and overeating and stuff. Like you can learn to look on Thanksgiving and not have it be just an absolute fucking massive deviation that hedonically. So
The hedonic deviation. Maybe honestly, maybe you can even like comment to a relative that you like really trust or that you're like really close with about the struggles that you're having with it, so that they can either like be there for you and support you emotionally, or they can understand. Okay, actually, this is really good that we're talking about this, because I don't know if anyone else has experienced this or if this is like kind of like a universal thing. I think when you like get into fitness and fitness becomes part of your identity, it can be a little, I think, stressful to not behave along those lines, right? Not like behave according to that identity surrounding like relatives and friends. So for example, you're like the fitness person, like people see you posting your lifts, they see you posting your like back double buys, your grandma sending you DMs like looking thick, solid, tight, you're looking huge, bro, what's your stack, whatever. You get to Thanksgiving and you're not eating like what you regularly eat or what like I guess your relatives perceive like healthy eating as. There's a very high chance that you're going to get comments like, "Oh, you're on your off day today, buddy," or like, "Oh, that's not what bodybuilders are eating," and stuff like that can like take you over the edge. It can just like be like the last like drop in the bucket, so to speak. So just like having a conversation with your relatives and being like, hey, like this is a a pretty not an issue for me, but this is something that weighs on me psychologically. I don't appreciate these comments, like, or I'm trying to like better my relationship with food, and I'm trying to enjoy my time with you. So I would appreciate it if you guys didn't like talk about this. I don't know. It's a really case dependent thing, but I think opening up a narrative about it and communicating it can also help you to kind of like just bring down that anxiety a little bit and feel like you're just like having to hold this up inside of you and you're tense the entire night, like trying to deal with these demons in your head.
That's so true. It's like people feel that they have to deal with these problems alone. And especially if you're lucky enough to have people around you who support you and love you, like you don't have to. It's okay. You can bring this up to your partner or your parents or your siblings or whomever's there that you feel comfortable with and say, just as Diego said, hey, I would really appreciate your support with this. I'm currently working to improve my relationship with these type of events. I'm really excited to spend this time and eat with you. And I would just prefer if we focused on something else. Also, while noting those around you are likely going to be participating in things that you might choose not to, right? There are people who aren't aware of how to appropriately, handle Thanksgiving per se. Maybe they're, hey, let's go out and smoke some weed before we go eat, like, or just dumb shit. Like, you don't have to participate in the behaviors that others are doing. You might notice other people that are binging and stuff like that. And, or maybe not, right? It doesn't matter. But just understanding that you're on your own journey and that you have complete agency over your life. And while at times the food may feel like, man, I have to go off plan, understand that you actually have complete agency over what you put into your mouth. And this is kind of the other side of the spectrum of the advice we're giving to you guys today is at the end of the day, you are in control and you do control how much that you decide to eat. A lot of these things, while they may be pent up and can be biological in some sense, we're not built to have Oreos in our day-to-day diet. That's not something our body has been created to deal with. You have the opportunity to set yourself up for success. So when the time rolls around, you have the skills, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, you have the support system around you to bolster your ability to minimize this shoveling activity, right? So I think that while at the end of the day, yes, it's stressful and it's difficult, you still have the opportunity to say no and to actively participate in other things that bring you joy and help you make you feel like the holidays aren't just about overfeeding perhaps, but are about those other things as well.
Yeah, exactly. We're not trying to place like a negative connotation on overeating and on having social meals and quote unquote hedonic deviations. What we're kind of just like trying to bring awareness to is the fact that this can happen within a controlled environment. This doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Like it can be, you can enjoy holiday meals without totally derailing and like waking up and just being like covered in like empty boxes of like cookies and stuff, just like blacking out entirely. Like you
Mhm.
can just like have a piece of pie and you can just have a plate of like mashed potatoes and be okay,
Mhm.
like it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, I had the piece of pie. I have to eat the entire thing now, which
Mhm.
I understand. Like what we're trying to say is like, we understand, like we've been there, but it doesn't have to be that way. And
Yeah.
you can use a lot of these strategies to just like minimize the chance that it does happen. I think now that we discussed that, do we want to talk a little bit about if it does happen, what to do?
Sure. Yeah, do you wanna start?
Why don't you take the honors, please? I feel like I've been babbling.
You've been
I
babbling
have a
very
lot to
well.
say on this. Yeah, I have a lot to say on this topic. If you haven't noticed, I've had my runs.
Yeah, I,
Uh,
I could also briefly kind of just talk about my experience with this too, because
oh,
I don't have,
please.
it's not the Puerto Rican, but it's the Jewish family. So it's the, hey, eat this, eat this. It's the mother forcing you to have food before. I mean, if anybody knows me personally, they know that if I'm hungry, I'm not the same version of myself. I can become a really nasty person, and don't you dare unmute that mic.
Really nasty person. Really
So
nasty.
keep me fed. My mom has taken that to the extremes at times, but I love her to death. Shout out, mom. Um, you know, back like at Thanksgiving when I was younger too, even not that young, like this is like 3, 4 years ago, I would secretly go and like smoke weed and then have a bunch of food and then go to the bathroom, like, go purge and then come back and eat more food. Like that's a real thing that would happen. And that would start to leak into other meals of my life where I'd just be out with friends, we're having margaritas. I see food less as maybe just an opportunity to have fun with my friends, but as numbers, like calorie numbers that take me over this kind of almost Jarvis in my head saying, this is my MyFitnessPal bar. It's like, imagine you're playing a video game and you have a bar of calories you kind of always see in some way of your brain. And you just see these things as red, red, red. It's going over, over, over. Not okay, not okay, not okay. Eat it still. And how am I going to minus back down to my maintenance, right? I'm just going to get it out of my body. So I have personally struggled a lot with binging and purging. And for those who don't know, purging just means basically throwing up or getting it out of your body, or even just like chewing and spitting. Like, these are all things that actually happen. And we don't have to avoid talking about it, because you probably have someone in your life, even if they haven't told you or not, are struggling with these things. So it's very normal. While it's not ideal and it's something you should look to progress out of and build a better relationship with food, it happens all the time. So don't feel afraid to bring this up with people in your life. Even though it might feel scary, it's probably not, you're not the only person struggling with that experience, especially if you're someone who has fitness related goals. So that's been my experience with it. I think now it's just the knowledge of understanding how food is stored, as well as just like having the experience of how shitty I felt after doing that. It's more than enough to not go back to those behavior patterns. And while you might be listening to this thinking, whatever, I'm going to go do it anyway, go do that. Go have fun with it and tell me how you feel afterwards, and tell me if that's behavior you actually want to repeat again. So if you're someone who still struggles with it per se, and just as the cycle's really rampant, and your day after Thanksgiving, you're like, I'm going to go on the treadmill, I'm not eating anything today. Like, generally, I think that's bad advice. I think that you could focus on the things we talked about previously, getting enough protein in, hitting that target, having your fruits and vegetables, and trying not to see this as I must restrict and punish myself, where use that food as fuel and go hit a sick PR in the gym and go have a really good lift, right? So those are really helpful strategies. I would also say that, it's a long period of time in which you're overeating throughout the holidays. If you happen to be in one of those camps where, November through December through January is a lot of overeating, maybe it is a good idea for you to focus on, outside of these meals, having more protein and vegetables. And this advice is going to, once again, depend on who you are. If you're someone who has disordered eating, maybe you should just stay on plan regardless, right? And just accept that you're going to gain 3, 4, 5 pounds throughout the winter months. That's okay. Understand you can always enter a fat loss phase. It's not that difficult to lose 3 to 4, 5, of pounds of fat. That could take maybe a month, and then you're back to normal in February, right? Just having that understanding, you are in complete control of your diet. Hopefully, you're going to be living a very long time, and you're not going to remember the couple pounds of fat you gained, but you're going to remember those memories you made with your loved ones. You're going to remember the experiences you had, the laughs, the jokes, that comment you made, the gratitude shared, the generosity experience. So try to zoom out a little bit, understand that your body is a super flexible and really adaptive vehicle. It has the ability to come up and down. And generally, you're going to have these ranges your body likes to stay in, and it won't let you get super, super big unless you have some type of genetic difference about you, which is possible, but is unlikely. So yeah, that would be kind of my addition to that.
And to jump off that, I would like to add, just reduce friction in your life, right? If you know that the holidays are not going to be conducive to being in a fat loss phase because a lot of the activities are food centric, maybe just put off the fat loss phase. I know it's crazy. Like it's insane to think, but you don't need to be cutting. Like no one's telling you that you need to cut through the holidays. Like I get it. You want to be shredded for the summer. Everyone wants to be shredded for the summer. But if you know that starting your diet through the holidays is just going to lead to more stress and less enjoyment of the activities that you should be enjoying with your family, because you're only really going to get these like a handful of time in your lives, like as life progresses, you're going to see your family less and less. It's just how things go, right? Like you're going to move in different directions. You're going to be more busy. And these are times that are pre-planned to be able to bring people together and like catch up, be able to like share memories and like reminisce on old times. Like those are really, like Max said, the things that you're going to remember later in life. You're not going to remember if you lost 3 to 4 pounds of fat during the holidays and got marginally more defined abs. Like it doesn't, it's not like, if that is your priority, that's great. That's amazing. But if you feel like you have to diet during the holidays, I'm here to tell you that you don't. You can just put that off and do it during a time that's going to be more conducive towards that. The holidays are probably going to be conducive towards just accepting that you're going to be in a surplus and focusing on just crushing your gym performance, just going hard and heavy in the gym, just packing pounds on the bar. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's going to feel better than just trying to just like be a sailboat going against the current. Like it's going to be an uphill battle. Just
Mhm.
focus on performance, focus on kind of a growth mindset, on instead of trying to detract, just like, okay, how can I use these extra calories, this extra fuel to like funnel it towards something? Like I have literally had my best blocks of training during the holidays. Guess what? It's because there's more calories coming in and I just feel good. I'm just ready to rip 500 pounds off the ground. Like food is energy, apart from it being just like, I guess like a moral thing to a lot of people, where like food can be good or bad. At the end of the day, it's energy. That's all it is. So maybe just reframe kind of your mindset surrounding it a little bit and just try to reduce friction in your life in that regard. Like you have plenty of time to diet until summer rolls around. You don't need to start your diet in December. You're just setting yourself up for failure and you're setting yourself up for a lot of hardship and you're setting yourself up to get literally the worst from both things, right? Like you're not going to get the best experience from the holidays because you're going to be stressed the entire time. You're not going to get the best results from your diet because you're obviously like going to be surrounded by really tasty food that you're going to have to like constantly hold back on eating. So just enjoy both. Like don't I if I told myself this 4 or 5 years ago, I bet I would have looked at myself and have been like, man, like what are you talking about? Like why I need to get shredded. I need a diet. Like training is the
Mhm.
only thing that matters. But I feel like as you mature in life, you realize that there is a time and place for everything. And you just have to periodize your life properly. There is no like black and white, good or bad. This is what I have to be doing right now. But there is like maximizing your chances of like doing everything properly by just like placing it at different points in your like year, in your like calendar year, so to speak. So
Mhm.
instead of thinking that you have to diet during the holidays, maybe just like put that off until like the events surrounding your life are a little bit more conducive towards that. That would be my advice.
I think that's a great, somewhat final note to end this podcast on. Understand you can always lose fat. You can always shed it off later, as Diego just said. Make sure that your environment isn't setting you up for failure. Focus on the benefits and the positives of these meetings with your loved ones. As Diego said, they are finite and they become more and more finite as everybody ages together and gets older. No one's going to remember you based on the definition of your abs, but rather the energy you bring and the individual you are and the way you treat others. So try to zoom out, focus on the positives of these holidays. Understand that it's okay if your body fluctuates day to day. It doesn't show you the overall trajectory you're headed in, and that there's so much positive things to gain from these meals beyond just focusing on the hedonic deviation. So have fun with the holidays. Make sure you're also have a coach voice in your head that keeps it balanced advice. You're not just saying go crazy. You're saying within reason. Maybe you're portion controlling. You're setting yourself up for success the day of, days leading up to, a lot of protein and vegetables. Remove yourself from the room if you feel that your stress and anxiety are climbing up and you feel that you would rather benefit from a different environment. And just remind yourself that, as Diego said, try to set yourself for a lower friction setting. Maybe don't cut during the holidays and allow yourself to be at maintenance or a slight surplus and train your fucking ass off.
I like that
So, yeah.
last note. That's a good one. Just pump iron, dude.
Just push.
It's
No, for
good.
sure. Is there anything else you want to add that you feel like we missed in this segment?
No, I think that was a great summary, honestly. I mean, it's like a muscle, really. Like the whole psychology surrounding this and your ability to handle these like times of the years, like you can train it. It's going to get better over time. And it's probably not going to be perfect your first time around. Like maybe you'll have a couple binge episodes here and there, but like over time, as you practice moderation and as you practice all of these habits, they're going to become the new normal. You're going to reach a point in which, if you are struggling with this, I can tell you right now, like you will reach a point in which you can just be with your family and then go up and have a slice of pie and be perfectly content with just one slice of pie and not feel bad about having that slice. And you can continue to enjoy the rest of your night. Like you don't, that feeling of like overwhelming anxiety surrounding food and like this guilt just like in the back of your head telling you that like you're a phony, like you're not who you say you are, you're not like working towards your goals. It's gonna be less and less loud as like the years go on if you do practice these things. So practice makes perfect. Like it's not going to be perfect the first time around. But like try to, like Max said, set yourself up for success. Like try to like implement what you can implement, and at the end of the day, realize that like the holidays aren't about the food. The food come with the holiday for sure. Like it's one of the things that it's kind of like, I guess, centered around. But the main thing should be just like spending time with your family and just enjoying your life. Like at the end of the day, these goals are just that. They're just like some goals that you have that like are included in your life. They shouldn't be your life, because then like what's the point? Like why are we trying to do any of this? Are we just trying to like aimlessly like go around and like change our aesthetics for the sake of question mark? Like what? Just if you see that it's getting to a point in which it's detracting from your life, then maybe it's a moment to an opportunity to take a step back and just assess like, what do these goals mean for me? Like, how do they add to my identity? Like, who do I want to be seen as? And like, what do I want to be seen like by in the next 20 years? Just,
Yeah.
I think like Max said earlier in the podcast, like if there are problems surrounding food and surrounding these events, maybe they're red flags of like something else deeper going like on that you maybe need to address, or you maybe need to just like question a little bit and have conversations with yourself about, or with a trained, mental professional like a therapist or a psychologist or something.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. I think that's a really great note to end on. So, guys, if you are listening up until this point, really appreciate you making it this far. Also, drop in the comments if you're on YouTube, just what has your experience been like with the holidays? Perhaps some strategies you have that you feel could be beneficial to others viewing the pod as well. Maybe it's, things that you've implemented that has just helped you to stay more on track, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a mindset shift or anything like that.
Or what your favorite holiday food is. I feel like that's the most important one, really. I don't care about your strategies. I care about what your favorite holiday food is. If you don't say pecan pie, you're wrong.
Mine as a kid was always the Stouffer's Thanksgiving stuffing. Just the worst shit. It's so good though. It's so delicious.
Just the stuffing.
Like the store-bought box of stuffing, it's just
that's crazy. So like not even the turkey, like just the stuffing.
Bro, the turkey is always mid, unless like actually my cousin is nasty at cooking and she'll be doing like a multi-course meal, I bet, this year, and she actually makes a mean turkey. Yeah, it's nuts. Meal. She used to work at a restaurant. She like went and like was a chef, and her now husband owns like a bunch of restaurants in the city. So
yo, can I get leftovers? Like,
yo, that's gonna be sick. My deviation gonna be Brady. It's gonna be sick. But yeah, I like that. Comment down below what you guys love eating during the holidays. But beyond that, make sure you're doing all the stuff. Do your taxes, like, comment, subscribe, pay back. Let's keep promoting the podcast. Really appreciate all the support in person I've been receiving as well as online. So thanks so much for being here and supporting us. Reach out to either of us through Instagram, either through Tissue Talks or our personal Instagrams if you guys have any feedback, comments, things you'd like to see in further episodes. But up until then, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Peace, guys. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.